Hey guys, as I always say, Monday again. I hope you had a restful weekend and you're ready to kill this week. As always, I'm gonna start by giving you some feedback about on the LOs that you submitted, and then I'll move to what we have for next week. So for this week, we had LO 18 and LO 19. LO 19 was absolutely perfect. I have no problem. I have no feedback to give other than tell you that I'm really satisfied and it looks like you're doing very well. LO 18, one item that I may need to address, it was about calculating variance, and it was a true or false item asking you if you just calculate the difference between uh, how much deviates your score by the mean. Um, yes, but that's not the only thing we do. We get the deviation scores, right? And we square them, and then we add the sum of them, and then we divide it by n minus 1, right? So that information again is in your book in the beginning of the chapter, but I just wanted to make sure it's clear for everybody. All right, for this week, um, we're getting towards the end of our book. Now it's getting a little bit more fun, I think, and we're getting into more like specific operational details about how you write your research, and the things that we're going to cover today again up to a point, because we talk about results or discussion, but up to a point, um, they they apply on your final project. So chapter 20, let's start with chapter 20, which is always again with my notes. I don't want to forget anything. Writing your manuscript and determining authorship. Right, so we're at this point. As an introduction, if there was no scientific publication, or only like you could write in fora, and you had blogs and journals, but not scientific journals, right? Like Sports Illustrated. In those cases, what I'm trying to say is that if there is no scientific publication, there is no scientific progress, right? So we really need these scientists to do that research, and we really need them to publish it through a specific process. And what's it that is that the specific process we'll talk about in a little bit, but what is called dissemination of scientific knowledge is a huge issue. And in fact, it's considered something unethical if you have acquired knowledge and you haven't tried to share it with the public and the rest of the community. So the dissemination of results, knowledge, scientific knowledge, is essential for us as scientists. So I talked about a process. That process that strengthens the quality is, of course, the peer review process that we talked about. And we're going to talk about it even more. But also, we're going to talk about writing a scientific manuscript, right? And of course, it's a skill. There's a learning curve, and it takes time. So we all need to be patient. And I can remember my times when I started writing, and I'm still learning, of course. And a lot of times when I'm grading students' work, and as I'm going to do, I'm guesstimating with your work when you submit your drafts, we'll ask for more scientific language, right? And there's a specific way we write, and there's a reason for that. All right. So before you start your data collection, you should have in your head, and that's something again that applies to your project, the objectives, the authorship line, and if you, of course, if you your goal is to publish it, should always be a goal. you have at the back of your head some journals that would be appropriate. So as we said before, you start with a lit review, and then somehow you find your research question and then your hypothesis. And it's nice to have an outline so you know what to say, like I'm going from point A to point B to point C to point D and so on and so forth, and then you build around that. That's a nice way. I still do it. Or a lot of times when I'm grading, I'm writing down the outline of some students. I'm like, do you see what you did here? How you jumped from one thing to the other and there's no flow, no connection? Again, as I said, scientific writing is unique, and most of us start learning how to write with the so-called creative writing. And creative writing is great, but it's just different than scientific, and it's different in um, the mechanics, the organization, or even the grammar. And table 21 can give you more information about that, but you can tell that there's no expressive description, there's no relaxed organization in scientific writing. Things are very formalized and very specific, and as I say a lot of times, it's very airtight. Okay, we're not writing a story about something. And this is not mythology. This is not anything like. It's very robust. Okay. Now, let's break it down a little bit more. Look at figure 20.1 to see the specific sections. Of course, we'll have a title. In the beginning, yeah, of course, there's intro, methods, results, and discussion, but in between, usually when you write your manuscript, between the title and the introduction is the abstract, right? So the title, it can't be too many words. There are specifications for each journal. You have to be very specific, not use acronyms, not use words that are very general. They don't give you specific information about your project. And a lot of times we start with the title, but as we write it and at the very end, we also have to go back and check, does it really match what we actually wrote, or we have to make some adjustments. It actually happened to me in a manuscript that I took it back to revise it, and then as I was revising it, we were revising, all the authors, we had to change something in the title based on the changes that we made in the manuscript based on the recommendations of the reviewers. Abstract, the most critical info, it has to stand alone. Some journals will tell you that it has to have sections, and you actually write the section, methods, results, discussion. Some of them, they say, yes, sections, but not actually write the name of the section. It has to have all the aggregated info. Again, length 200, 300, 150, 250, it depends. Sometimes it's really hard to write all of it in just use 200 words. Sometimes it's by characters. Yeah. Intro. I always say the final approach, start with something general, talk to us about what's out there, what we know, identify what we don't know, and why it would be important, significant to investigate it, and then you end up with the purpose of the study. And a lot of times you'll see, even if you look at my papers online, my work, a lot of times, therefore, the purpose of this study is or was boom, 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 right? And sometimes you break it down even more by writing specific objectives. The hypotheses are there, of course, and the length of the intro depends. It depends. For me and for others, the intro is most likely the most difficult part of research. It's really hard because you have to know everything, and you have to combine everything and bring it down to what you're doing and make sense, right? And sometimes that's very hard, and you'll see it when you write your own draft. Methods. The methods should allow replication. What does that mean? If you take my paper and you want to do the same exact research, you should be able, by the information I'm giving you, to replicate my study and do a very similar study, right? I have to give you information about the participants, the design of the study, the procedural so-called protocol, and the statistical analysis. Population, and you can see box 21. What was the sample size? Why was the sample size? What are the descriptive characteristics, gender, height, BMI, whatever is important for me. If I have different groups, how I designate them in the different groups, and which were the inclusion and exclusion criteria. It can be gender, sex, it can be hip replacement, medications, fitness level, who knows, right? And then the design. Is it a cross-sectional design? Is it an RCT? Is it, you have to talk about if there was any randomization in your design, there was any blinding. It was a mixed method. Was it quantitative and qualitative at the same time? Now, the protocol procedure, if you haven't talked about IRB and consent form at the end of the population characteristics, this is where you put it. You say that, you know, after IRB approval, we contacted these people and they, for example, signed the consent form electronically. And then, of course, you have to talk about the protocol. This, the first time we told them this, the second time they did this, the third time they did this. You have to explain exactly how you did it, how you collected the data. And then at the end, the statistical analysis. What did you do? Descriptive statistics, inferential statistics, Pearson correlations, regression analysis, and usually you add the software in SPSS, right? In R. That's useful as well. And which version, if there's a specific version, for example, in SPSS. Now we go to the third part, which is the results. Here, a lot of people are getting confused because they don't report just the results and they try to interpret the results. No. You're doing Pearson correlations? Cool. Give me the R. How much was it? 0.7 minus 0.25? What was it? Don't tell me more. You'll tell me that. You'll tell me what it means in a little bit, right? And in the result, you put figures, of course, and you put tables, and you put graphs as well. So the tabular form, the tables are great, especially if they use the word they're supposed to be. You put all the information, you explain, it has to stand alone. And when you write in text about the table, you don't just repeat the same information, right? You take some parts out, but I can see something in the table, and then I can read what you wrote in text, and then combined makes sense to me. I understand more when I'm reading your paper. So for the visual representation, we'll have all kinds of figures, diagrams, graphs, photos, right? Again, they have to stand alone, and it's nice to combine the information. I see it visually, and then maybe in the text you point out something that I should focus on, and so on and so forth. All right? The discussion. We take the results. Usually in the beginning of the discussion, you say the purpose of this paper was blah, 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 just one sentence, and then you say a little bit about the results, and then you interpret them. What does it mean? What does that mean? It means what do the results mean, right? And usually you compare them to other research if it's out there, right? This is in accordance, or maybe it's not in accordance, right? And of course, that will have some implications. Those implications for research, implications for practice, who knows, right? You end up with that, and then you go on with that, and then you talk about limitations of the study. Which are the limitations? All studies have limitations. Sample size. The sample was not representative of the population. Convenience sample. Some kind of age restriction that happened, and so on and so forth. And then you have future recommendations for future studies, something that you didn't do, or you realize that it's still missing, and you put it out there for somebody who's reading it, and then maybe they do that and they add on whatever you and other people have done already. References, everything that is cited in the text has to be cited at the very end in the reference list, and everything that's in the reference list has to be cited in the text. Nothing more, nothing less. Nothing less. What type of references? It depends. So it can be APA, it can be Vancouver. That can be really hard to do, especially if you have a lot of references, and sometimes they have limit. There's a limit in some journals, 40, whatever. Me personally, I use EndNote. You pay for that software. There are others, right? And once you put the reference in there, it stays forever, and you can just generate the reference list at the end, and then let's say you want to submit another journal, and that journal is not APA anymore, it's Vancouver. You click Vancouver, and then it changes the reference list automatically, which is very time efficient, right? I'll tell you that. And then there are some additional sections, acknowledgements. You want to thank participants, some people that helped you, but they were not exactly put in the authorship line, and so on and so forth. And at the end, if there's any kind of conflict, anything, for example, funding, and if you had a grant and you were working, and so on and so forth, or Gatorade gave you some samples to see if they're working. There is some kind of conflict now because Gatorade gave you something to see if it's working. You have to report that. I hope that makes sense. So you have to report anything that could imply bias. That's it. That's all I have for. No, that's not all I have. Huh. I have more. All right. Now, when you're beginning to write, a lot of times we're trying to find reasons not to start, and you have to find reasons to start and not excuses not to. It's challenging. I promise you that. I know. I promise. I know how challenging it is, but you have to start writing, and you'll see where it takes you. Right. So when you write, expect to write several drafts, and that's why we're doing it with drafts. Nobody's perfect. Even before submitting it, you need a lot of drafts. And after you submit it, a lot of times the reviewers, most of the time, they send it back to you, and you make editing and this much editing and this much editing and this much editing. There are a lot of examples in our text that you can look. And then when you have to determine authorship, who is an author? What do you have to do in order to be named an author? And it depends. You see that we have those criteria from the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. It has to do with substantial contributions, drafting or revising final approval, and accountability for aspects of the MS. But no matter how you see it, and we're going to talk about authorship line again in the next chapter a little bit, so these two chapters overlap, then you have to put them in order. Who's going to go first? Usually, that's something that is predetermined, and usually it goes by contribution. The first author, which is the most important author, right, is the person that goes first. Another thing that is it happens very often, but there's no written rule about it, is you see the mentor or the PI or somebody who pretty much was supporting the whole thing, but in a way he or she is not really in need of being the first author. They go last out of respect for maybe younger researchers and people who are just trying to do their thing now, and you see them at the very end. Who is the corresponding author? That's the last thing, and that I will leave it to talk about it in the next chapter. But in general, you see there could be 1, 2, 3, 15, whatever a high number of authors. Sometimes, yeah, the mentor will just go last, and that is pretty common. I've done it a lot of times when I've done undergraduate research. You see all my publications with the students, I'm always at the very end. All right, so this is chapter 20, and let's move to chapter 21. Submitting it and finding the best journal. As we said before, the peer-reviewed journal is the gold standard for dissemination of any kind of scientific information. And we've talked about it before. There is an enormous amount of information out there, but the scientist is different. The science contributes only in their science by validation, and that validation comes from the peer review process only. Okay, I write sometimes on Medium. Okay, that's not peer review. So that has nothing to do with my contribution in my science. Okay, I'm trying to disseminate things that I know and I think things are useful to the public, but it's not peer reviewed. The things that I add on my science have to go through the peer reviewed process, which means the scientific journals. Okay? And you see there are 12 steps in figure 12.1, which gives you the whole process, all the steps of the process of a submission. All right, first question, where to submit? That's a pretty legit question, right? First of all, before you submit, you do some research. Is it worth it to be published? It's a hard question. Okay, this is for you to think about it and maybe ask a couple of people that you trust. The end product, whatever you actually did, is it of a high level of quality or of any level of quality to actually be published? Is whatever you found significant, innovative? What's the impact you think your research will have? So these are hard questions, but we need to ask them before we even consider which journal is the best. And table 12.1, not figure as before, gives you puts all the types of MS of manuscripts that could be considered for publication, and you can see different types, not just original research that we usually think about. There are a lot of them, right? Now, what's your target audience? I don't know. You tell me. Who's going to be most interested to read your research? So you go to the journal, you can find the scope, and then there you can find why the journal was started. Why did it start? And it's designed in a way to communicate some information to whom? If that audience is the same audience that you think would benefit and would actually be motivated and interested in reading your stuff, you're good. Except for the scope, you can definitely see recent publications. I do it all the time. Right? I look for journals that recently, the past 2-3 years, have published something similar to mine that really tells me that I shouldn't go towards that. The organization which is behind it, APA, ISIS, and us, who's behind it? That again is an indication of what this journal is about. And then you need to look at the instructions to authors. Take time, see what they're asking for, and make everybody's life easier. Meaning, the more you take into consideration the instructions and you write the way you should write, the easier it will be for the people who are going to receive it to identify if it's a good fit or not. Okay, spend some time to read those instructions. The mission. Does the journal's mission match your research? Again, you check at your manuscript and you see pretty much if your manuscript is appropriate for that journal. How can you evaluate the impact of your findings? Who knows, right? But a good question is to ask somebody who knows more about you, about that specific field. And because if it's not, the impact is not high enough, a lot of times we get what we call administrative rejection or desk rejection, and I have received many of them. Don't worry about it. Which means the editor, not the reviewers. First the journal, the submission will go, the manuscript, it will go to some editorial staff, they will check it, and then they will send it to an editor. The editor has to find reviewers. If the editor thinks that it doesn't match or the impact is not high enough for the journal, or for whatever reasons, you get the administrative rejection right away. Boom, rejected. It hasn't even been sent to the reviewers and it's already rejected, right? So we need to be careful to not waste our time. So we need to pick what's best, and we need to prepare our manuscript in a way to avoid that desk or administrative rejection. So you submitted it, it's great. it can take a long time to actually publish, right? And that's why I say save time in the very beginning. If it's not administratively rejected, then it will be sent to the reviewers. That's what I do too. I'm an editor in the International Journal of Exercise Science. Find reviewers. It might take time for me to find reviewers, right? And then it comes back from the reviewers, and I have to read both of their comments and suggestions, and then get back to the authors. One side of the spectrum is reject, the other side of the spectrum is accept. Accept, just accept, is very, 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 very rare. So most of the time is reject, accept with major revisions, or accept with minor revisions. So then I will send out the decision, and I will send the specific comments from the reviewers. And if it's with major revisions or with minor revisions, they have to resubmit if they agree and fix everything and give us a point-by-point answer. I fix this, there it is. In general, as an editor, that's what we do. When we have to reject something is when there are fatal errors that cannot be fixed anymore. So if they can't be fixed, usually we give people a chance, because we're all sometimes you are on that side, and the other time you're on the other side, and you are submitting something. If the error, the flaw is not fatal and could be changed, even if it requires a lot of work, we give them a chance. So we give them accepted with major revisions instead of reject. Now, something that is very unethical is to submit it in two journals. You actually sign that you haven't done that. And you check boxes, and you have to include it in your cover letter. It's very, very important. You should not submit it in two journals at the same time, trying to save time, for example. Right? Now, once it gets accepted, that's awesome. It's called in press or in print sometimes, until you get your page numbers and your volume number. If it's available immediately, it's called a head of press, and then of course you get a DOI, and a DOI is very useful to actually detect your paper no matter what. It's a very unique, specific number. How can you find journals? Again, another way to find journals for your manuscript is use references that you already use for your manuscript. That's a cool way, right? So if a lot of your references come from very specific journals, maybe you should look at them first. And of course, there are online databases, and table 21.2 will give you the most the database that are most common in our field, and the most common journals. Now, a very controversial subject: impact factor. How can you evaluate if a journal is good enough or too good for you or not good enough for you? Most of the time we look at the impact factor, which is on average how many times each published article from that journal has been cited the past 2 years. Okay, and that's started very in a very innocent way, but now we're fighting over impact factors, and impact factor comes from Web of Science database. So all the journals are fighting to have all the requirements that Web of Science wants in order to get included in the Web of Science, so they can get an impact factor. That's crazy. It is important, right? But it's not the most important thing. And a lot of times you can't compare journals from different fields. It's impossible. Some fields are more popular if you want, some others are not. Doesn't mean though they're not both important. Source normalized impact per paper, that is another factor that can compare journals in different areas. And so you have the average number, SNP, so it's the average number of the published articles over the citation potential of subject. And then we'll have SJR, which is another one that can include, except for the quantity, that every other metric includes, also the quality. All right. When you're formatting your manuscript, as I said before, do not add time on the whole process. So try to format it the way it's supposed to be. Be very, very careful. Don't make mistakes. Spend some time then so you can save some time later. The specification of the manuscript, again, it depends on the journal, word limits, font, style, and size, etc. Language, it will tell you if it's like British English, American English, and so on and so forth. And one example that's very common, and it's a good idea that our textbook included, is the difference between sex and gender. Sex is binary, right? Gender is not binary. Sex it depends on biological factors, and gender on more cultural is what you identify with. And then the sections of the manuscript, we cover those, and most of the time are the same: the intro, methods, results, and discussion. But some have some difference, like the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. It makes you it's mandatory to have a practical application section, because it is a journal that wants to the audience is more practitioners, so that's very, very important for them. Then we have the letter of intent, or the cover letter. You say that's original data. We talk usually about IRB, authorship, that you haven't submitted anywhere else, that you are the person that everybody accepts as the corresponding author, and you take full responsibility, and everybody else has read it, and blah blah blah, and you sign it. And sometimes you also include a significance, or you ask for exception for some rules, like I was 40 words over, 45 words over, and I was trying to make a case that please allow me to be a little bit over concerning the word limit, because blah blah blah. Reference style, as I said, we have specific styles. It depends. Again, and note, that's my go-to solution. Tables and figures, we talked about them. They need to stand alone. Legends should provide enough information, and a lot of times most of the time, we have separate files, either all the figures and the tables and stuff, all the figures together, all the tables together, or each figure in a separate file, and specific resolution, and like there are a lot of things that go into that submission. It sounds simple, but it can take a long time. Authorship. I submitted recently a manuscript as the first author, PLOS1, right? And in that manuscript, you have to specifically say, we were 8 or 9 people, what each one of us did, right? And then, as I said, there's a thing that I didn't mention before. There's the corresponding author, and that person is in charge of all the communication with the journal. And once published, if you read it and you want some more information or whatever, that's the person to email. Usually they give the email and phone number. Conflict of interest, we talked about that. Financial consultancy, that has to do with bias again. The submission of the manuscript, of course, happens online. And I don't know if you've noticed, I call it manuscript. Once published, I will call it paper, right? Submission form, usually there's a checklist, and also you check that you have read the instructions, you pay any fees. Now I'll come to the fees in a little bit, because it's kind of funny, but not so funny. You also have a copyright transfer agreement. So you give the copyright to the actual journal. Sometimes you cannot publish your own work for, let's say, 2 years. Why? I'll explain in a little bit. Because people have to spend money and buy it from the journal for those 2 years, and that's how they make money. So you don't have to pay when you submit it, okay? Unless it's open access. Open access means it's free. When it's free, sometimes, or most of the time nowadays, you pay. So recently, again, we paid $1,600, and another one, $2,200. Yes, $2,200 to make it open access, right? And it's hard to find those fees anymore, and most of those journals are going towards making you pay, right? And that's a lot of money. So if you really think about it, you do all the work, you write it, you do all the edits, you have to submit it, and then you give them the rights, and you pay too. That's kind of interesting if you really think about it. But for the open source and paying open access, I'm sorry, um, the assumption is that if it's open, more people will read it, which means more people will cite it. So that's a trade-off. And that's it. That's pretty much it. I hope you like going into the specific of writing a manuscript and submitting a manuscript. Two hellos for Sunday. Start again if you haven't already thinking about your final project. Look at the files, read out the syllabus, read our syllabus, and let me know if you have questions. Start working, I would say, towards your draft one. There's extra credit in that, and also your final project will look better. Please put a lot of work and make sure it's ready when you send it my way. And that's all for now, right? Don't forget, lift intentionally, not habitually. See you next Monday, guys. Have a good one.